Welcome to Murder Mile UK True Crime. This isn't a video, it's an audio experience. The only images you'll need for this episode are these. So close your eyes, open your mind, and savour the sounds of Murder Mile. If Patrick MacKay had killed 11 people as he confessed to, he would be one of Britain's most prolific serial killers, after Harold Shipman, Dennis Nilsen, Peter Sutcliffe and Fred and Rose West. Only he didn't. Of the 11, 3 he was convicted of, 8 he was suspected of or confessed to. Only 2 of those he was ever charged with, and all 8 he later denied, perhaps at his lawyer's insistence. But why did he confess to 11? And why were the detectives so certain of his guilt in those crimes he denied? A nameless detective told tabloid newspaper The Sun,
"We thought we had a mass murderer. It looked as if we were going to clear all of our books of almost every outstanding murder in London. An oddball like MacKay. He's one of the most terrifying killers to be walking around London in a long time."
And as a drunk psychopath with a bad memory and inconsistent methods, it was easy to pin a maniac's murder on MacKay, as he'd willingly confess to every killing within reason, even if he was innocent. By the summer of 1973, it's confirmed that he'd committed one provable murder, Isabella Griffiths. But being elderly, infirm, and likely to be a robbery which, in a short burst of rage owing to his warped moral code, this killing could easily have been an accident, as there's no hint of murderous premeditation. Of the 8, he may have admitted to hide his killing as being a high-profile case. It gave him exposure. Mary's fitted his method, with the police coercing him to confess, but unless he broke out of prison, it's unlikely to be him. He may have denied Christopher's killing because, being a boy, he didn't want to be as hated as the Moors murderers. Or by partially proving his guilt, as with Leslie's killing, did he want his crimes to have a sense of mystery, with his full list of victims being uncertain, just like Jack the Ripper? As an unwanted nobody and a certified psychopath, his only chance to become someone important, famous, and maybe even admired was by becoming not just a killer, but a serial killer. The problem was, by that summer, he'd only killed one in a possible rage-fueled mistake. His crime spree was both petty and pathetic, and when it came to achieving any goals, MacKay was chaotic and inconsistent. It's likely, unless his next killing was truly shocking and heinous, that Patrick MacKay would be entirely forgotten. So why, if Sarah Rodmell, his 8th victim he was suspected of, so neatly fitted his method and his motive, did he again deny murdering her, when this killing was impossible to prove that it wasn't him? Patrick MacKay, Two Sides of a Psychopath, Part E. Throughout his life, in the same way he had no consistency where he stayed, how he earned, and who he saw as a role model, Patrick MacKay lacked commitment. Across the early 1970s, he lived in hostels, hospitals and remand centres. Occasionally his mums, the Cowdreys, and often Reverend Braggs. But he had no focus or goal, and he aimlessly wandered the city, drunk or drugged, and achieved nothing. Having quit his job sweeping up leaves not far from the crime scene at the Mercers, and later leaving his pleasant lodging with Mr. and Mrs. Whittington, broke and heavily drinking, on the 7th of July 1974, just 1 month after the murder of Leslie Goodman, MacKay did something truly unusual. That night, having previously had a falling out with Reverend Ted Bragg, the other priestly mentor who had let him lodge at his vicarage in East Finchley on many occasions, MacKay called him and asked to meet up, perhaps to apologise, as he was often plagued with remorse and had very few good father figures. When the priest left, MacKay didn't meet him as planned. Instead, he broke into the vicarage. He made himself a hot meal as if he owned the place. He didn't search any drawers for things to steal, as far as we know. And in the bedroom which was once his, he hid underneath the bed, waiting not only for Ted to return home, but for him to go to his bedroom, undress, switch out the lights, and fall asleep. Hours later, MacKay crept across the hall, into the priest's room, and 8 months before his sadistic and brutal killing of Father Crean, his only other priestly mentor. He didn't strangle, stab, or bludgeon him to death. Instead, as he soundly slept, MacKay went through the priest's pockets looking for cash. It was something he could have done at any time on any day, and yet he chose to do it then. But why? Ted awoke, and in the darkness he asked,
"Pat, is that you?"
And although MacKay would kill others for reasons a lot less than that, he fled. And having already been seen, MacKay was arrested just 2 days later. Again, it was a crime without a clear motive. So did MacKay do it to scare him? Was he drunk? On drugs? Was it a botched robbery by a coward who was yet to learn that his perfect victims were frail old ladies in the wealthier parts of town? Or was a psychopath who'd achieved nothing, had a seed of an idea about leaving a legacy as a serial killer spawned in his mind? And this was a failed murder. Having sabotaged his bail conditions on a suspended sentence for chasing a homeless man with a metal pole and defrauding Father Crean's cheque. On the 31st of July 1974, at Highgate Magistrates Court, the burglary at Ted's vicarage saw him sentenced to 4 months. Held at Wormwood Scrubbers Prison, MacKay later stated it was here that, upon his release, he planned
a campaign of violence and terror,
resulting in the 23+ robberies he would confess to, and the murders of Father Crean and Adele Price. For 4 months, he was locked up with nothing to do but seethe, fester, and to dream of the heinous levels of cruelty he would inflict, as the name Patrick MacKay would become synonymous with serial killing. Released on the 22nd of November 1974, being broke, unemployed and homeless, as his mother had disowned him, he'd fallen out with the Cowdreys, and Reverend Brack obviously wouldn't take him back. He spent that Christmas at a bail hostel at 38 Great North Road in Barnet, with the bulk of it blind drunk. On the night of Saturday the 21st of December, 92-year-old spinster Sarah Rodmell was robbed on a doorstep for a few pounds and brutally bludgeoned to death. Described by detectives as the work of a maniac, it had all the hallmarks of MacKay's crime spree, and Sarah was the perfect victim. But was this the first killing in his campaign of violence and terror? Born on the 14th of June 1883 in Mary-le-Bow in East London, 92-year-old Sarah Ann Rodmell would be the oldest and frailest, but also one of the poorest of MacKay's victims, if indeed he was her killer. As a toddler, being raised barely half a mile from the killings of Jack the Ripper, her early years were riddled with poverty, disease and fear, as the mortality rate for a working-class child was low, and even lower for those who struggled to make ends meet. As the oldest of 4 siblings, to Frederick, a railway porter, and Sarah Ann, a piece worker, as was typical in that era, her siblings quickly followed, with Alice in 1886 in Whitechapel, Frederick in 1887, and Ada in 1888, both born in Mile End, just a few miles east. Crammed into a small 2-room lodging on Shoreditch High Road. In 1897, with all 4 children barely in their teens and the youngest not even at school, their mother died, aged just 37, leaving the family devastated. As was his need, although still grieving, Frederick, their father, remarried. Frances became their stepmother. In 1896, their half-sister Lily was born, and they also adopted a young girl called Frances Ray. Times were hard, money was tight, poverty was endemic. But for the Rodmells, family was everything. By 1901, the family were living at 132 Caulfield Street, a dirty, sodden industrial part of Bethnal Green, one street south of the pub where 73 years later she was last seen alive. Yet the rest of her history remains a mystery. For 40 years, she almost entirely vanishes from any records. She never marries. She has no children. And although she can vote, as a woman, she couldn't own a home or even her own bank account. Then in 1939, with the outbreak of the Second World War, said to be working as a kitchen hand, she was living in a ground floor, one-room lodging at 49 Ash Grove in Hackney, with a widowed office cleaner called Mary A. Locke. Age 56, with no savings, she lived a hand-to-mouth existence on the fringes of society as a forgotten woman who had to be reliant on her friends and family to survive. But fate is often cruel. In 1937, her father died, and as a poor man who hadn't got a will, she was left nothing. In 1941, her brother Frederick died, and along with that, his financial support. In 1963, her sister Ada died, followed by Alice in 1969, her half-sister Lily in 1970, and with Mary Locke, Sarah's long-term friend and possibly her partner in 1974. She had survived so much, but now, aged 92, she had no one, and she had nothing, except for a cat, a cold dark room, and a pitifully small pension. By the Christmas of 1974, Sarah had lived at 49 Ash Grove for more than 30 years. Later demolished to make way for a bus depot, by the 1970s, being in its dying days, Ash Grove was the epitome of squalor. Comprising of 2 lines of dilapidated Victorian terraces, with many derelict and being squatted in, it was surrounded by an overhead train to the east, a canal and the Haggerston gas towers to the south, the GLC workshops to the west, and on the same street, J. Bush & Co., a large chemical works. It was noisy, dirty, rough, caustic, and riddled with violence and drugs. As a council-funded flat for only the most impoverished, Sarah's lodging was so bad, the walls leaked, the floorboards were rotten, it ran rampant with rats, bedbugs and lice, and it didn't have any heating or hot water. Sarah Rodmell was an old woman who the council had left to rot, and when she died, their costly obligation would cease. But little would anyone know that it wouldn't be the hunger or the cold which would kill her. Saturday, the 21st of December 1974, was typically damp, but unusually warm for winter. As was her daily routine, being a lonely old lady who hated living in the dank isolation of a cold council flat. At 5 p.m, she left her lodging at 49 Ash Grove. Dressed in a tatty flower pot hat, a long black coat and a woolen skirt, the same clothes she'd worn almost every day, wearing men's slippers, she shuffled the 45-minute journey through the unlit back streets, stopping every few minutes as her back had a stoop. Old Sarah, or Ginger as she was known, had had a hard life, and being very old and incredibly frail, although she was a tough old woman who was said to be direct and abrupt. Neighbours said Sarah was notorious for her drunkenness. She'd been banned for causing a nuisance from most of the pubs around. With Ada Dayton, her neighbour, stating she always went out to the pub at about 5 o'clock, the one she wasn't banned from, and came back about midnight, usually worse for wear. Drinking wasn't just the highlight of her day, but also a necessity. Living off a state pension of just £6.75 per week, roughly £90 today, drinking was her one pleasure, which gave her something she didn't have. Her local pub was the Temple Street Tap, a Charrington's own pub on the corner of Temple Street and Hackney Road, just off Cambridge Heath train station. And although having a reputation, old Sarah was limited by the places where she could booze. This was an unusual haunt for a 92-year-old spinster. From the outside, the Temple Street tap was like any other pub, with a saloon bar, a dartboard, sticky floors, and with the clientele being exclusively men, it had a foul-smelling toilet. But inside, the waitresses served drinks as their bare breasts jiggled, and on a grotty stage, strippers shook their pale asses for baying crowds of ogling old perverts, as this was known as a titty bar. Old Sarah didn't care. She liked it. In fact, she was a regular. Described by the landlady, Laura Harris, as a sweet old lady who was like a mother to us all. All the customers, young and old, loved her. And as she sat at the bar every night, nursing 2 bottles of Guinness, it wasn't just the occasional chat and the companionship that she liked, but being perched next to an electric heater, it kept her old bones warm. Whether she was gay or not, being a childless spinster who'd lived with a woman for decades and frequented a strip club is immaterial. As if this was what made her happy, who could deny her that? That night was special for Sarah, as with the government having introduced a £10 Christmas bonus for pensioners. Although a token gesture, that night she would spend £3 on drink, and the rest she would save as part of a Yuletide merriment. And although the landlady later said, the customers knew her, they liked her, and had begun to chip in to buy her a turkey and some groceries for Christmas, she would never receive it, as by then she would be dead. But was it MacKay? Her killing matched his method, and she was his perfect victim. So why deny it? At 11:10 p.m, as per usual, the landlady aided a frail and drunken Sarah to the door. The barman Brinley Gregory helped her across Hackney Road, and she staggered her regular route home. Later recreated by WPC Daphne Robson for the police investigation. With the country still partially blighted by an energy crisis, she stumbled the unlit back streets of Gasthouse and factories, up the Oval, Andrews Road, over the canal, and having stopped under a bridge to rest. 45 minutes later, she entered Ash Grove. We know she didn't leave the pub with a stranger, so whether someone followed her home along this dark, half-mile walk is uncertain. But just shy of midnight, neighbours heard her staggering and fumbling for her keys. Ada Dayton, her neighbour, later stated, I heard a thumping noise, but just thought she was locked out and was banging for the lady upstairs to unlock the door. No one paid any notice to the noise, as being a habitual drunk who many had fallen out with. Ada recalled, she sometimes brought drinking companions home with her. Otherwise, she had no visitors. And that's all they thought it was. With no screams heard, it was likely she was attacked fast by someone a lot younger, and overpowered by someone taller and stronger, most likely a man who had no qualms about robbing an old frail lady. Stealing a black handbag, we can never know if her attacker knew about her £10 Christmas bonus. But then some monsters are so callous, they would kill an old lady for a few pounds, or even less. But in this case, they also stole her pension book, her spectacles, a tin opener, and a bent tin of cat food. Attacked on her own doorstep, even though a single shove or a punch would have simply floored her. Sarah was repeatedly beaten over the head with something blunt, sustaining wounds the detectives said were horrific and the work of a maniac. And although the press stated she was sexually assaulted, we don't know to what extent, but it was said that her stockings were partially removed. It was a killing as pointless as it was tragic. The next morning, Harriet Law, a 73-year-old widow living in the flat above, came down with a cup of tea for Sarah, but found that her bed hadn't been slept in. Opening the communal door, it was then that she saw the body. Cold and lifeless, her frail legs crumpled underneath her, her pale arms bent in unimaginable positions, her skull caved in, her hair matted, her brain exposed and swarming with flies. It wasn't well reported, but it caused an uproar in this small patch of Bethnal Green. The pub's regulars were stunned. Many of the dancers cried, and with the landlord Harry Harris stating,
"She didn't have a decent death, but we're determined to see that she gets a decent funeral."
a whip round raised £160 for a coffin and a headstone, and he spent weeks using the pub's PA system, pleading for information. The investigation was headed up by Detective Chief Superintendent John Cass of Hackney CID. Police conducted house-to-house inquiries, but almost no one heard or saw a thing. A television reconstruction played out on Police 5, but resulted in no suspects. And a voicemail at the Hackney Gazette led to 2 credible tips of a first name and an address of a suspected killer. But the tape was so bad, it was inaudible. A black handbag was handed in, but it couldn't be confirmed if it was Sarah's. The murder weapon was never recovered, and its type, either a metal or a wooden blunt instrument, was impossible to verify, even by autopsy. And although one of the £1 notes given to Sarah in the pub as change had Lou 1974 written on the back in biro, this was never handed in, and it was never found in MacKay's possession. With no fingerprints, no witnesses, and no suspects, the case went cold. When questioned, MacKay denied murdering Sarah Rodmell. He made no confession. We don't know if he was coerced by detectives, shown the crime scene photos, or driven to the location. And with the evidence against him being slim, in his memoir, he simply wrote,
"I was never charged with that."
It's the kind of crime that MacKay both committed and confessed to. And as a possible wannabe serial killer with a legacy to leave, but only one provable murder under his belt, why did he deny this one? Unlike Heidi's killing, it would have been impossible to glean any reliable facts from the newspapers, as even the Hackney Gazette called the assailant the £5 killer, when in truth, £7 was stolen. And with the Daily Mirror callously calling her a meth drinker, implying she was a vagrant, victim shaming was rampant. But her killer does mirror MacKay's method, as it was said he'd begun a campaign of violence and terror. He spoke of exterminating
all useless old people.
He was living in a hostel and was broke. He travelled to kill. He liked drinking, so may have frequented the pub, even though nobody saw him. Father Crean was bludgeoned with a blunt instrument, as was Mary Hines and Leslie Goodman, if they were him. And anti-Semitism was suspected in Leslie's killing. So was Sarah killed, if she was gay? Inconsistency runs rampant throughout all of MacKay's proven crimes. And although it makes no sense for him to travel so far east to kill an old frail lady for the sake of £7, as a bag snatcher who attacked pensioners without any remorse, it matches many of his 23-plus confirmed robberies. It has similarities to the attack on 83-year-old actress Jane Comfort, whose attack could have ended in her death. And this attack on the doorstep of the victim matched others like his, such as Adele Price and Isabella Griffiths. The difference is, Sarah was poor, but Adele and Isabella were not. So if this murder was MacKay, is this the killing which changed his crime spree and made him focus on old frail ladies who were wealthy? 4 days after Sarah's murder, MacKay spent Christmas Day drunk at his hostel in Barnet. By Boxing Day, being broke, while prowling Wilton Street in wealthy Belgravia, he conned his way into the home of Lady Beecher. He grabbed her by the throat, he pulled her knife, he snatched her bag containing £115 and an £85 medallion, and then he fled. 4 days later, he committed a similar robbery on Tite Street in affluent Chelsea. By the new year, his crime spree had ramped up. On the 20th of January 1975, he robbed an old lady in Finchley. Another he held at knife point in Chelsea on the 28th. He snatched a bag on the 29th. And on the night of Sunday the 3rd of February, having carried her bags as a so-called Good Samaritan, he robbed another old lady at Red Lion Square in Holborn. Across January to March, he stole roughly £600, roughly £8,000 today, in cash, gems and trinkets. And with increasing levels of violence, Chelsea CID were mapping this unfolding crime spree, with DS John Bland, who later interviewed Patrick MacKay, on the hunt for a thief, who just weeks later murdered Adele Price and Father Anthony Crean. Unlike his earlier pathetic and petty crimes, this campaign of violence and terror was written about in the newspapers and brought MacKay the infamy that he craved. And even though detectives were yet to link the robberies or murders to MacKay, this was the start of his legacy as a thief and a serial killer to be. Throughout his childhood, his adolescence, and into his early adulthood, by then, aged just 22, MacKay had failed to commit to anything. A job, a home, friends, family, sobriety, or reforming his bad ways. But now he had a goal, a future, and something he could actually commit to. When arrested, the press feverishly picked apart every detail from his past to prove that he was a psychopath, whether true, a lie, or unprovable. Like the animals he tortured, the fires he started, the quotes he spoke, or his Nazi ideology. Everything he had done was a cry for attention. And now, as a killer, he was getting everything he desired. By the time of the trial, with Patrick MacKay now synonymous with serial killing and being branded with nicknames like the Beast of Belgravia, the Devil's Disciple, and even the Psychopath, his legacy was forged by 3 pieces of his own fabrication to cement his place in criminal history. First was his confession.
I killed 11 people.
Which every newspaper printed in bold, but failed to report when the truth was uncovered. Second, his 40-page prison memoir, a biased narrative with himself as the only living witness, which was read out in court, sealed his fate, and as a pure piece of sensationalism, was reprinted in newspapers verbatim. And thirdly, as part of his legacy, which became more infamous than his crimes, the 4 photo booth snaps he had taken just after Father Crean's murder, which many like Michael, Mary Hines' nephew, state,
I think MacKay was mad. Look at the photographs of him. You can see it in him.
But is it? Think about it logically. MacKay didn't walk into a photo booth and candidly capture 4 photographs of himself in a state of mania. No. He travelled to his mother's home in Kent to collect a chicken he'd had a roast for him. He then took it to a train station, possibly Charing Cross or Waterloo. He went to a photo booth. He pulled out 10p. He popped it in the slot. And having planned out the shots, because as we all know, with 4 photos taken every 5 seconds in a blinding flash, 3 are always terrible and 1 is barely passable. Yet he somehow managed to create 4 shots which perfectly typified Patrick MacKay, the serial killer. With 1 ripping apart flesh, 1 having devoured it, 1 in a pained mental state, and 1 gripped in pure rage. It's a perfect piece of stage management, and for the sake of entertainment, the world bought it. Patrick MacKay was front-page news across 1975. He was a poster boy of cruelty. His past was debated in full, and yet it may have all begun by accident when the robbery of Isabella Griffiths went too far. So with MacKay already a certified serial killer, why did he deny killing Sarah Rodmell? It's a crime which matches his method. Being broke, he had a motive. He often travelled to steal money, and with many of his robberies being violent, with his victims being old and frail, sparked by a short burst of rage owing to his warped morals, each could easily have turned into a murder, just like Sarah's. Detectives admitted,
"We thought we had a mass murderer with as many as 10 or 11 victims. It looked like we were going to clear our books of almost every outstanding murder in London."
And with this one committed by a maniac and MacKay described as a psychopath, it was win-win for both. But the evidence against MacKay was slim to non-existent. Nobody saw him in Bethnal Green or at the Temple Street tap, which was full of all the regulars. He denied her killing. He said he knew nothing about it. And in Psychopath, a book of dubious sources, it states,
"He established an alibi."
But this can never be corroborated. Conversely, in the well-researched book, Britain's Forgotten Serial Killer, John Lucas suggests that as Reverend Ted Brack occasionally drank at the now demolished Lord Hood pub in Bethnal Green, half a mile south of the Temple Street tap, and that MacKay may have joined him, but this can never be proven. It's a killing as similar as it is different to MacKay's method, except for one tiny detail. None of MacKay's robberies or murders had any sexual elements. Even as old ladies like Adele and Isabella lay there, dead, silent and still, he didn't undress them, he didn't fondle them, and he didn't kiss them, as he was a sadist, not a rapist. But with the newspaper stating,
"She was sexually assaulted."
if this was true, or he tried to strangle her with her own stockings, or they'd simply fallen down in the struggle, in the same way, he didn't want to be branded as a child killer with Christopher. In Sarah's murder, did he not want to be labelled as a rapist of old ladies?